the moment Alberta Beckett rode into Dusthaven, New Mexico territory, with a broken saddle strap, a bruised cheek, and the deed to a ranch she had never seen, she knew that God had either a tremendous sense of humor or an outright grudge against her. It was the spring of 1878, and the land was wide and unforgiving, the kind of country that swallowed men whole and spat out their hats and their pride. The sky above the mesa was a savage, beautiful blue, the color of something that could not be owned. Alberta noticed that first before she noticed anything else. She always noticed sky before anything else. Her mother had called it a poet's affliction. Her father had called it impractical. Both of them were dead now, and the sky kept right on being beautiful, which she supposed was proof that the world did not pause for grief. She rode a gray mare named Consequence, a name she had given the horse herself on account of every decision she made seemed to result in that particular animal being inconvenienced. The saddle strap snapped 2 miles outside of Dusthaven, and Alberta had ridden the rest of the way leaning slightly to the left, jaw tight, refusing to stop because stopping felt too much like giving up, and giving up was the one luxury she absolutely could not afford. Dusthaven was small but not tiny. It had a main street of packed red dirt, a general store with a faded sign, a saloon called the Iron Kettle, a livery stable, a barbershop that also served as the town doctor's office on account of the barber having spent 2 years studying medicine before the money ran out, and a small wooden church at the far end of the street that leaned slightly eastward, as though in the process of slowly reconsidering its commitment to the town. Alberta pulled Consequence to a halt in front of the livery stable, slid down from the saddle with considerably more grace than the situation deserved, and looked around. She was 26 years old. She had dark brown hair that she kept pinned back in a practical braid, brown eyes the color of creek water in summer, and a face that people often described as serious before they got to know her, and then they described it as honest, which was more accurate. She was not a tall woman, but she carried herself with the kind of posture that made people think twice before assuming things. The deed in her coat pocket was to a property called the Beckett Ranch, so named because her uncle, Clement Beckett, had built it 20 years prior, and had the particular eccentricity of naming things after himself. Clement had died 4 months ago of a fever, leaving Alberta as his only living relation. He had left her the ranch, his mule Persimmon, and a letter that said in its entirety, "Alberta, the ranch is yours. Do something good with it. The land is better than it looks at first. Give it time. P.S. The mule bites strangers." Alberta had not known Clement well. She had met him exactly twice, both times when she was a child. But she had been living in Santa Fe working as a seamstress, and the life there had been slowly pressing the air out of her, and a ranch in the territory felt like breathing room, even if it also felt like the most terrifying thing she had ever agreed to do. She had come alone. Her friend Mary Hutchins had told her she was out of her mind, and Alberta had kissed her on the cheek and gotten on Consequence and ridden north and west into the mountains and the mesas and the dust. Now she was here, and the saddle strap was broken, and she needed to find the road to the ranch, and she was hungry, and her cheek hurt where a low pine branch had caught her on the trail yesterday morning, and she had not slept well in a week. She led Consequence into the livery stable. The smell hit her first, warm and musty and animal, the smell of horses and hay and leather, and something else underneath it all that was familiar in a way she could not quite name. A lantern hung from a hook near the door, though it was the middle of the day and the light came in strong through the wide open doors. "Anyone here?" she called. There was a pause, and then a man appeared from the back of the stable, ducking under a low beam with the ease of someone who had done it 10,000 times. He straightened up and looked at her, and Alberta's first impression was that he was tall, and her second impression was that he was careful. Careful in the way he moved, in the way his eyes swept the stable before settling on her, in the way he held himself without being stiff. He was broad through the shoulders, with dark hair that needed cutting, a jaw that needed shaving, and eyes the color of wood smoke, not quite gray and not quite blue, somewhere in between. He wore a plain collarless shirt rolled to the elbows, worn brown trousers, and boots that had seen real work. He looked to be somewhere around 30, though the sun and the land had a way of making men look either older or younger than they were, and she could not be certain. He looked at her. She looked at him. Neither of them said anything for one beat too long. "Livery stable," she said finally. "I presume you work here." "I own it," he said. His voice was low and even, with the careful quality of a man who did not waste words. "I need my mare tended to and the saddle strap repaired, and I need directions to the Beckett ranch." Something shifted in his expression, not surprise exactly, something more considered. "The Beckett ranch," he said. "Yes, do you know it?" "I know it, Clement Beckett's place. He died in February." "I am aware," she said. "I am his niece. The ranch is mine now." He studied her for a moment without any apology for doing so, which she found she did not mind particularly. At least he was honest about it. "Roscoe Bancroft," he said, and extended a hand. She shook it. His grip was firm, but not the kind of firm that tries to prove something. "Alberta Beckett," she said. He nodded as though this confirmed something he had already half decided. "The ranch is 7 miles northeast, up into the foothills. I can draw you a map or ride out with you tomorrow if you'd rather not go alone." He said this the way he seemed to say most things, directly, without ornamentation. "A map will do," she said. He took her mare without another word, checked the saddle strap, ran his hands along the horse's legs with the practiced attention of someone who actually cared whether an animal was sound or just pretending to be, and brought Consequence a bucket of water and a good measure of oats. Alberta watched him from the doorway, arms crossed, noting that he moved around the horse the way good horsemen did, without announcement, without sudden motion, as though the animal was a living thing worthy of courtesy. She waited while he sketched a rough map on a piece of brown paper with a short pencil, marking the landmarks she would need: the split oak, the dry creek bed, the red rock formation that looked like a sitting dog from the east. He explained each one without being condescending about it, which she appreciated more than she let on. "The strap will be fixed by morning," he said, handing her the map. "Thank you," she said. "There's a boarding house 2 doors down from the church. Widow Hargrove runs it. She's decent and the food is edible." Alberta almost smiled. "High praise." He looked at her steadily. "I don't oversell things." She believed him completely. She found the boarding house. She settled in. She ate the edible food, and she lay in the dark that night listening to the wind move across the mesa outside, and thinking about the ranch she had never seen, and the life she was attempting to invent from the raw material of a dead uncle's kindness and her own stubbornness. She thought briefly, without particularly meaning to, about the man in the livery stable. His stillness. The way he had looked at her without performing any emotion for her benefit. She pushed the thought away and went to sleep. In the morning she collected Consequence, whose saddle strap had been repaired with neat, tight stitching that was better than the original, and she paid Roscoe Bancroft what was fair and a little more, and rode out of Dusthaven following his map. The ranch appeared to her over a rise in the trail, and she pulled Consequence to a stop and just looked at it for a moment. It was not grand. It was a stone and timber house, low and solid, with a deep porch running along the front. There was a barn in better condition than the house, a chicken coop that had seen better decades, a paddock with rotting fence rails on one side, and a well. There were 2 ancient cottonwood trees in the yard that were clearly the finest thing on the property, tall and silver-barked and swaying slow in the morning wind. Beyond the house the land opened up into a wide meadow that climbed gradually into the foothills, and above that the mountain stood, blue and massive and permanent. It was beautiful in the way that working things can be beautiful, honestly, without any effort to impress. "All right," Alberta said aloud, to no one, to Consequence, to the mountains, to her dead uncle. "All right." She rode down into the yard. She spent the first week discovering the scope of what she had inherited, which included the house, the barn, the well, the land, 23 head of cattle that were grazing somewhere in the upper meadow, 3 horses in the barn, Persimmon the mule who did indeed bite her on the second morning, a root cellar full of preserves, a main room full of Clement's books, and a list of debts owed to a man named Harrison Cole who owned the largest ranch in the valley, the Double C, and who had apparently been advancing Clement credit for supplies in the last 2 years of his life. She discovered the debts when Harrison Cole himself rode up to the house on a handsome black horse, with 2 of his men flanking him like punctuation marks. He was a big man, well dressed by frontier standards, with a thick red-gray mustache and the particular manner of a man who was accustomed to people adjusting themselves to accommodate his presence. He tipped his hat with polished courtesy and told her, in the language of polished courtesy, that the debt came to $340 and that he was willing to be patient about collecting it, given her circumstances. He also mentioned, with that same polished courtesy, that if she found the ranch too much to manage, he had long been interested in acquiring the northeast pasture, which bordered his land, and would be happy to discuss a fair price. Alberta thanked him for riding out, told him she intended to pay the debt in full as she got the ranch operating, and said she was not selling any portion of the land at this time. He smiled the smile of a man who is hearing what he expected to hear from someone he does not expect to hold their position. "Of course," he said, "you know where to find me." He and his men rode out. Alberta stood on the porch until they were out of sight and then went inside and sat down at Clement's table and did the arithmetic on exactly how much money she had, how much she owed, and what it would take to make the ranch productive enough to close that gap. The numbers were tight and optimistic and required a great deal of things to go well. She was not accustomed to things going well by default, but she was accustomed to working. She put on her work gloves, went out to the paddock, and started replacing the rotting fence rails. She came into Dusthaven for supplies at the end of the second week. She stopped at the livery to check on Consequence, who she had left in town to rest a sprained fetlock, and found Roscoe Bancroft in the process of shoeing a mule with what appeared to be a philosophical disagreement between himself and the animal about whether the procedure was necessary. Alberta watched from the door of the stable while the mule attempted to express its opinion through the medium of obstruction, and watched Roscoe talk to the animal in a low, patient voice, not commanding it but persuading it, negotiating, until eventually the mule gave in not with any enthusiasm but with a kind of grudging cooperative resignation. "You talked it into it," she said. Roscoe looked up from where he was bent over the mule's hoof. "Sometimes talking works better than fighting. That is a surprisingly reasonable philosophy for a livery stable." He finished the shoe, straightened, and checked Consequence's fetlock with careful hands. "Better," he said. "Another 3 days of rest and she should be sound." "Thank you." She paused. "I had a visit from Harrison Cole." His expression did not change dramatically, but something in it went still in a specific way. "He told me about the debt," she said. "He also mentioned the northeast pasture." "He always mentions the northeast pasture," Roscoe said, and the economy of that sentence contained what appeared to be a detailed history she had not yet been told. "He has wanted it before. He has wanted it since before Clement owned it. He pushed hard when Clement was sick. Clement held on. Then I will hold on too," she said simply. Roscoe looked at her for a moment with those wood-smoke-colored eyes. "The debt is real," he said. "Just so you know, I am not trying to discourage you. The debt is real and Cole knows exactly what he paid for, and he did pay for it, and Clement knew what he owed. Cole is not wrong about the number." "I know," she said. "I am not disputing the debt. I am disputing the idea that my ranch is for sale to clear it." He nodded slowly. Then he went back to his work. She gathered her supplies and went home, and that evening she sat on the porch with Clement's account books and made a more detailed plan. She had enough cattle to produce a decent profit at market in the fall if she could keep them healthy through the summer and get them driven to the railhead at Las Vegas. She had 3 horses that she could sell if she needed to. She had her sowing if it came to that. And she had the land. The next morning she was up at dawn and out in the meadow on foot, counting cattle and checking their condition, making notes in a small book she carried in her coat pocket, thinking through everything in the methodical way she approached most problems. She did not know everything about ranching. She knew this clearly. She had grown up in Santa Fe, she had worked as a seamstress, and she had a practical intelligence and a willingness to learn, which she considered to be the foundation of most genuine competence. She acquired 2 books from the general store's small lending shelf on cattle management, and she read them at night by lamplight. She asked questions of old Harlan Webb, who had been Clement's nearest neighbor and a rancher for 40 years, and Harlan answered them without condescension because Alberta asked her questions well and without false modesty. She rode out to mend fence, and she was no expert at it, but she got better. She fixed the chicken coop. She discovered that the ranch's water rights were secure and that the upper spring was still running clean. She planted a kitchen garden in the dirt beside the house because practical things needed growing, and because there was something grounding about putting seeds in the earth and waiting. She came into Dusthaven every week or 10 days for supplies or business, and she always stopped at the livery, first because Consequence needed occasional attention, and then because she found herself stopping anyway. She and Roscoe Bancroft did not have long conversations. They had short ones, specific ones, about horses and roads and weather and the state of things. He asked after the cattle once and she told him, and he listened the way some people listen, with his full attention, without offering advice she had not asked for. He answered questions she asked with the same quality of attention, neither withholding information nor padding it with opinions. She noticed that he was alone. He had a man who helped at the livery, a young Mexican man named Fernando who was 17 and quick and good with horses, but Roscoe himself appeared to have no family in Dusthaven and no particular social orbit. He was present at the livery. He was present occasionally at the general store, and she had seen him at the Iron Kettle Saloon once through the window, sitting at a corner table with a glass in front of him and a book in his hand, not talking to anyone. She did not ask about it. It was not her business, and she had her own life to manage. 6 weeks into her time at the ranch, the trouble with the cattle started. It began with 3 head missing from the upper pasture. She rode the fence line and found no breach, which meant they had either wandered through the gate or someone had moved them through it. She found no sign of them in the surrounding country, and she rode a wide arc for 2 days and did not find them. She reported it to the county sheriff. A man named Augusto Herrera, who rode out, looked at the pasture, nodded thoughtfully, wrote something in a small notebook, and told her he would look into it. His demeanor suggested this was a formality that would produce no practical result, and she appreciated at least that he was not dishonest enough to perform false optimism. Then a week later she lost 2 more. She rode into Dusthaven on a Tuesday afternoon with the kind of frustration that lives behind your sternum and sharpens everything you see. She stopped at the livery without entirely meaning to, dismounted, and stood in the doorway. Roscoe was repairing a bridle, seated on a low stool near the window. He looked up. "Cattle trouble," she said. 5 head in 2 weeks. He set the bridle down. "Any evidence of who?" "No evidence of anything. No tracks worth following." "I have a suspicion but no proof, and a suspicion without proof is just a feeling." He was quiet for a moment. "Tell me your feeling anyway." She looked at him. "Harrison Cole." He did not disagree with this. He did not agree with it either. He just sat with it. "He has men who know this country well," Roscoe said carefully. "Better than most." "I know," she said, "and I know I have no proof. And I know that without proof I am just a woman with a complaint and no evidence, and complaints without evidence have a way of making the woman look difficult rather than making the problem look real." Something went through his expression then. Not pity, nothing like pity. Something sharper and more honest than that. "What are you going to do?" he asked. "I am going to sleep lighter," she said, "and I am going to keep count better. And I am going to figure out how to watch the upper pasture at night without exhausting myself to the point of uselessness during the day." "Harlan Webb's boy rides night watch for his father's cattle," Roscoe said. "He might be willing to ride for you for a fair wage on alternating nights." She had not thought of this. You think he'd agree? I think you could ask him. She nodded. She looked around the stable for a moment at the quiet order of it, the tools hung precisely, the hay stacked neat, the horses standing calm in their stalls. Do you ever get tired of it? She asked, not entirely sure what she meant. He understood anyway. Of being in one place. Of the smallness of it. The routine. He considered this genuinely the way he considered everything. No, he said. I got tired of the size of things for a long while. The smallness is a relief. She looked at him then with the specific curiosity she had been keeping at bay since the first morning. Where were you before? He paused, long enough that she began to think he would not answer. Abilene, he said. Before that, Dodge City. Before that, a cattle drive from Texas that took 14 months. Before that, the war. He said the last thing flatly, without inflection. The way you say something you have said so many times it has lost its particular texture, but none of its weight. The war, she said. He nodded once. She did not ask anything more about it. She understood about carrying things you set down every morning and picked up again without deciding to. She thanked him for the suggestion about Harlan's boy and went to see Harlan Webb. Young Thomas Webb, who was 19 and lanky and had his father's steady disposition, agreed to alternate night watch for a small wage and riding rights to the upper meadow trails, which he used for his own hunting anyway. Alberta accepted this arrangement with genuine gratitude, and Thomas took his first watch the following night, and no cattle went missing that week. She was making her way slowly, stitch by stitch, the way she made everything. The summer came on strong and hot, the kind of heat that sits on the land like a weight, and Alberta worked through it in the practical manner she had adopted for all difficulties, which was to acknowledge it existed, make whatever accommodations were sensible, and continue. She wore her hat whenever she was outside, which was most of the time. She drank water consistently. She took rest in the shade of the cottonwood trees in the worst heat of the afternoon, and used that time to do the mending and the accounts, and the reading that required her eyes and hands, and not her back. Roscoe Bancroft came out to the ranch in early July. She was in the paddock working with the younger of Clement's 3 horses, a chestnut gelding that had spirit but poor manners, when she heard hoofbeats on the track from the road and looked up to see him coming down the rise. He was riding a dark bay, solid and quiet, which seemed an appropriate horse for him. He dismounted at the paddock gate. Passing through, she asked, though the ranch was not on any particular road to anywhere. Coming to see if you needed anything, he said directly. Fernando mentioned Thomas Webb's been watching your upper pasture, thought you might be losing sleep. The honesty of this, the simple honest acknowledgement that he had thought about her situation and done something about the thought, was disarming. She was not accustomed to that. I am sleeping better, she said. Thomas has been good. She paused. Come in if you want water, it's hot. He tied his horse and came into the shade of the porch while she pumped water from the well and brought it out. He drank without ceremony, looking out at the land. You have done a lot, he said, looking at the repaired fence, the neat yard, the fixed chicken coop. The place needed it, she said, sitting down in one of the porch chairs. He leaned against the post at the porch's edge and studied the meadow. The cattle look good, he said. I could see them on the way up. They are grazing well. I lost one more last week, she said. Thomas saw nothing unusual that night, but when I counted in the morning, one was gone. Roscoe was quiet. I went to see Sheriff Herrera again, she said. He says without evidence there is nothing he can do. He says these things happen, cattle stray, and I should make sure my fences are secure. She kept her voice level. My fences are secure. I know, Roscoe said. Cole made another offer last week, she said. A letter this time through his man. He raised the number for the northeast pasture. He will keep raising it. I know. She looked down at her hands, which were brown from the sun, and had the permanent slight roughness of working hands now, different from the fine needle roughness of a seamstress's hands, but not entirely unlike it in spirit. He is going to keep making it difficult until I either sell or leave. Roscoe looked at her. Are you going to? He asked. She looked back at him, and this was perhaps the moment when something shifted, not dramatically, not with any theatrical clarity but quietly and with weight, the way real things shift. "No," she said. He nodded. "Then I will help where I can," he said, just like that, without fanfare. "Why?" She said because she needed to know, and because she was always someone who asked the question she actually wanted answered rather than the one that was easier to ask. He thought about it. She could see him thinking about it, not manufacturing an answer but finding one. "Because Clement held this land for 20 years and it cost him," Roscoe said. "And because Cole already has more than any man needs, and the wanting doesn't stop when you have enough, it just gets another man's name on it. And because you rode into Dusthaven alone with a broken saddle strap, and did not ask for anything except directions and a repair, and something about that struck me as worth taking note of." She was quiet for a moment. "You knew Clement?" she asked. "I knew him a little. He came to the livery. He was a good man. He had a particular way of talking to horses that was almost embarrassing in its courtesy." Roscoe almost smiled, not quite, but almost. Alberta smiled for real because she could hear it, the Clement of that description, she could hear it clearly. "The letter said the mule bites strangers," she said. "Persimmon," Roscoe said. "Yes. He bites me too, and I have known him 3 years." They sat in the shade, in the heat, in the particular quality of afternoon that is all sound and stillness, the insects and the wind and the distant sound of cattle, and something between them settled into a new configuration, easy and specific, neither of them naming it. Roscoe came back the following Sunday, and the Sunday after that. He brought his tools the third time without being asked, and replaced the broken hinge on the barn door that Alberta had propped with a piece of lumber, but had not yet been able to fix properly. They worked side by side through the morning, and she noted that he was a good worker in the same way that good workers recognize each other, which is by the quality of their attention to what is in front of them rather than what might be being observed. In August there was a social gathering at the church, what the town called a box supper, where the women of the town prepared meals in decorated boxes and the men bid on them, ostensibly for charitable purposes and practically for the purpose of spending time with the woman whose box you recognized or hoped you did. It was a tradition Alberta thought had a pleasantly transparent pretense and a pleasantly social result. She had been in Dusthaven long enough now to know the other women of the town, to have a name for herself beyond Clement Beckett's niece, and she went because Widow Hargrove had told her it would be good for her, and because even Alberta Beckett, who was practical about most things, knew that a person needed an evening off now and then. She sat in the church with the rest of the women while the men bid on the boxes, and when her box came up she watched, with a complicated mixture of amusement and something she would not immediately name, as Roscoe Bancroft bid on it. He bid steadily and without expression against a young rancher named Bill Foote, who was either genuinely interested in spending the evening with Alberta or making a statement of some kind to someone in the room, and Roscoe outbid him with the calm confidence of a man who knew what he was doing and had decided to do it. They sat together on the church steps in the warm August evening and ate the meal she had packed, cold chicken and cornbread and dried apple preserves, and 2 slices of a simple cake she had made from the receipt book she had found in Clement's kitchen. And the conversation was the best conversation she had had since arriving in the territory. He told her about Abilene, about the cattle trade, about what the plains looked like in the spring, about the particular quality of the light at dawn in Kansas that was different from any other light. He told her about learning horses from his father, who had been a farrier in Virginia before the war made Virginia a different place than it had been. He did not tell her much about the war itself, but she understood that it was there in everything he had become since, that it had burned off certain things and hardened others, and left the parts that remained with a particular clarity and quietness. She told him about Santa Fe, about the years of sewing, the fine work and the tedious work, the women who treated her like furniture and the women who talked to her like a person, the smell of fabric dye and dust, the mountains visible at the end of every street like a promise. She told him about the day she received Clement's letter and sat with it for 2 hours before she understood that she was going to go, that she had already decided while she was still pretending to deliberate. "What were you most afraid of?" he asked. "That I would get here and find it impossible and have to go back," she said. "That I would have to admit I couldn't do it. And instead—" She thought about the fence rails she had replaced and the cattle she counted every morning and the kitchen garden that was producing beans and squash and the accounts that were still tight but improving. "Instead, it is very hard and I am doing it," she said. He looked at her. The church steps, the warm night, the sound of voices and music drifting out of the saloon down the street. "You are brave," he said. She laughed. Not because it was funny exactly, but because it surprised her, the word, the particular word he had chosen, because it struck her somewhere that she was not prepared for, because she did not think of herself as brave, and the notion of it, spoken plainly in that direct, careful voice, was genuinely unexpected enough to produce laughter. He looked at her when she laughed, not offended, not confused, but with something that was very close to wonder. "I have never said that to anyone before," he said. She stopped laughing. He meant it. She could see that he meant it in the same way she could see that he meant everything he said, because he did not say things he did not mean. It was one of the most fundamental things about him. He had never called anyone brave before. Not in Abilene, not in Dodge City, not on the 14-month cattle drive, not in whatever he had survived in the war. And he was saying it to her now, on the church steps, with the same directness and the same absence of performance that he brought to everything. She sat with it for a moment. He sat with it too. "Most people think I am stubborn," she said quietly. "Stubborn and brave are not opposites," he said. "Sometimes they are the same thing wearing different coats." She looked at him for a long time, this quiet man with the wood-smoke eyes who had come to her ranch with his tools and watched her land and bid on her box supper and said the one word she had never thought to apply to herself. "Roscoe," she said. "Alberta," he said. The way he said her name was different from how anyone else said it. It had a fullness to it, like he was giving it room. They sat on the church steps for another hour, and talked about nothing in particular with the concentrated pleasure of two people who have discovered that they want to be in the same place. When she rode home that night under the vast New Mexico stars, she found herself smiling without having made the decision to smile. In September, the trouble with coal became more pointed. Alberta went to water the kitchen garden one morning and found that the irrigation channel she had dug to carry water from the spring had been blocked, deliberately, with a pile of stones and packed earth that did not occur naturally and did not get there by accident. She cleared it herself, working for 2 hours in the morning heat, and then sat back and looked at what she had removed and understood exactly what was happening. She went to Sheriff Herrera, who this time arrived with the expression of a man who was genuinely uncomfortable. "Mrs. Beckett," he began. "Miss Beckett," she corrected without heat. "Miss Beckett, I understand your frustration, but I cannot prove who blocked that channel, and without proof, I know," she said. "You have told me what you cannot do. I am asking what you can do." He was quiet. There was something in his face that looked like apology. She thought, not unkindly, that he was a man caught between what was right and what was powerful, and that was a particular kind of suffering even when the choice he made from that position was not the one you needed. She went home. Roscoe appeared at the ranch that afternoon, and she did not ask how he had heard because small towns were small in every direction. "Cole's foreman was seen on the road to your upper pasture 3 nights before the last missing cattle," he said. She looked at him sharply. "You know this?" "Fernando's cousin lives in the foothills. He was out that night and he saw. He will not testify to it formally, and I understand why he won't. It is not safe for him to put himself against Cole's men." "But I know it." She absorbed this. "So I know, and I cannot use it," she said. "Not through Herrera," Roscoe said, "but there are other ways." She waited. "The Territorial Land Commission meets in Santa Fe in October," he said. "If you can document the interference with your water rights, the blocked channel, and present a formal complaint, the commission has authority that overrides local interests. Cole has dealt with county officials because county officials are more manageable. He has not had to deal with the territory. She stared at him. How do you know this? I read, he said, and I spent time in enough territories to know how they work. She thought about it. It would require the trip to Santa Fe. It would require time away from the ranch during the last weeks before the fall cattle drive she was planning. It would require her to navigate a formal proceeding that she had no experience with, in a city she had lived in but in a capacity that had never required her to deal with official bodies of any kind. She thought about all of this, and then she thought about the blocked channel and the 5 missing cattle and the letter about the northeast pasture that she had not answered and was not going to answer in the way Harrison Cole wanted it answered. "Will you help me prepare the documentation?" she said. He nodded. Yes. They spent 3 evenings at her kitchen table building the case. Roscoe had a precise, organized mind and a gift for putting information in order, and she had her meticulous account records, her notes in the small book, her careful documentation of every incident, dates and details, and the exact words of every conversation with Cole and Herrera written down within an hour of each conversation, because she had begun doing this instinctively from the first week. He sat across the kitchen table from her in the lamplight, and she sat across from him, and they worked through the material together, and she was aware of him in a way that she was usually good at managing, but that was becoming harder to manage in the easy intimacy of the kitchen table and the lamplight. He was careful about not sitting too close. He was careful about a lot of things, she had noticed. He handed things to her by placing them on the table rather than reaching across. He never touched her without reason. But he looked at her when she was speaking with a quality of attention that was its own kind of intimacy, more than touching would have been, the undivided focus of a person who found everything you said worth hearing. "You have very good records," he said one evening, looking at her account book. "I was a seamstress," she said. "You charge by measurement and you keep track of every inch or you work for free. You were a good seamstress." "I was an excellent seamstress," she said. "There is a difference," he smiled. It was a full smile, unhurried, reaching his eyes. She had not seen it before, the full version. She registered it with something that was entirely beyond practicality. She looked back at the documents. "Roscoe," she said after a moment. "Yes." She kept her eyes on the page. "Thank you for all of this. You have done much more than I have any right to expect." He was quiet long enough that she looked up. "I know," he said. "I am aware that it is more than is expected. I am doing it anyway." She held his gaze for a moment in which something was being said between the lines of what was being said. "I know," she said. "I am aware that you know." He nodded slowly, and they went back to work, and the lamplight held them in its circle of warm gold, and outside the night was enormous and full of stars. Alberta made the trip to Santa Fe in early October, riding the stagecoach because it was faster and because Consequence deserved a rest. She was gone for 5 days. She presented her documentation to the Territorial Land Commissioner's office with the precise, steady delivery of a woman who had rehearsed the material until it lived in her bones, and who was not going to let nerves or condescension or the subtle suggestions of the men behind the desk that surely there must be some misunderstanding flatten what she had come there to say. The commissioner, a spare gray-haired man named Ezra Finch, who had the eyes of someone who had seen every kind of land fraud and range dispute that existed, listened to her with genuine attention and asked careful questions. She answered them. He reviewed the documentation. He wrote several notes. He told her he would need to review the water rights charter for the property and compare it against the territorial records, and that he would send a formal inquiry to the county within 30 days. She thanked him, spent the night in Santa Fe, walked past the seamstress shop where she had worked for 6 years with a feeling she did not fully attempt to categorize, and came home. Roscoe was at the ranch when she arrived back, sitting on her porch with his hat on his knee and his horse tied at the paddock, talking to Thomas Webb, who had apparently already told him the cattle count from the previous 5 days. He stood up when she dismounted, and the expression on his face when he saw her was one she stored carefully in the part of her that kept things she knew were important. "How did it go?" he asked. "It went well," she said. "I think it went well. We will know in 30 days." She went inside and put the kettle on for coffee, and called from the kitchen that he should come in if he wanted some. He came in and sat at the kitchen table, and she stood at the stove, and she told him everything: the office, the commissioner, the questions, the documentation, the walk past her old shop. He listened to all of it. "You did exactly right," he said. "I think so," she said. "I will know in 30 days." She poured the coffee and set his cup on the table, and as she put it down their hands were briefly near each other, not touching, just near, and the proximity of it was suddenly the most specific thing in the room. She sat down across from him. "I thought about you while I was in Santa Fe," she said, with the directness that had always been her most characteristic quality. "I thought about this table and the documents and the lamplight. I thought about it more than I thought about the things I was supposed to be thinking about." He wrapped both hands around his cup and looked at her. "I thought about you every day you were gone," he said. "Every morning I thought about how you were getting on. And I fed Fernando's dinner to Fernando, and I did not eat much, and the days went a little slow." She held his gaze. The kitchen was warm and quiet, the coffee was bitter and good, and the afternoon light came through the window at the angle that made the stone floor glow like something heated from within. "I am not a simple woman," she said. "I need you to understand that. I am stubborn, and I have a ranch to run, and I am not without difficulty." "I know," he said. "I have known that since the first morning. And I think you are the most interesting person I have met in a long time," he said. "And I think about your hands when I am working, and your voice when I am reading, and the way you look at the land like it belongs to you rather than the other way around." She was very still. "Roscoe," she said. "Alberta," he said. She reached across the table and put her hand over his, and he turned his hand over and held hers. And that was how it began, properly began. In the kitchen of the ranch her uncle had left her, over cups of bitter coffee, in October of 1878. The fall cattle drive happened. Alberta had been preparing for it since August, consulting with Harlan Webb, discussing the route with Roscoe, calculating the timeline to reach the railhead at Las Vegas where the buyers were operating. She had 16 marketable head that she intended to drive, keeping 7 for breeding stock and the winter. Roscoe closed the livery for 5 days, leaving Fernando in charge with precise instructions, and he helped her drive the cattle. It was just the two of them and Thomas Webb for much of it, though Harlan Webb's older son joined them for the difficult stretch through the canyon section. Alberta had never driven cattle. She was honest about this. What she had was Consequence, who turned out to be a natural cutting horse, and the good sense to take position and instruction without pride getting in the way of learning, and enough endurance to stay in the saddle through long days that left her aching in muscles she had not previously known she possessed. Roscoe rode beside her, patient and clear in his guidance, never taking over a task she was managing, never offering help she had not indicated she needed, but present and steady when the work required to, and sure in the situations where his experience made the difference. There was one moment in the second day when 3 steers broke suddenly left toward a steep arroyo, and Alberta went after them on Consequence without pause and turned them before they reached the edge, pushing hard across the slope, Consequence moving brilliantly under her. And when she had the steers back in line and looked across the dust, she found Roscoe watching her with his hat pushed back on his head, and an expression that she had no name for but that she understood completely. At night they camped under enormous stars, and Thomas Webb slept efficiently while Alberta and Roscoe sat by the fire and talked or did not talk, both comfortable, both knowing that comfort with silence is a particular kind of intimacy that is very hard to manufacture and very easy to lose. "Tell me something you have never told anyone," she said one night, not as a game but as a genuine invitation. He thought about it for a long time. The fire popped. The cattle were settled. "After the war," he said carefully, "I went home to Virginia, and the home was not there anymore. Not burned, just gone, the way things go when the people in them scatter. My father had died in the last year. My mother had gone to her sister in Georgia. There was nothing to go back to. He paused. I stood in front of the house where I grew up and I could not feel anything about it. I had expected to feel something. I had carried the idea of going home through 4 years of things I could not have anticipated, and when I got there the feeling wasn't there. There was just a house, just boards and a chimney. Another pause. I have never told anyone that because it sounded like something must be wrong with me. That I could not feel what I thought I should feel. She looked at the fire. I think the feeling was there, she said quietly. I think it had been used up keeping you alive long enough to get back. And when you got back there was nothing left of it for the moment because you had spent it all on the way. He looked at her. That is the kindest interpretation, he said. It is also the truest one, she said. Feelings are not infinite. They run out like water in a dry summer. The fact that yours ran out before you got home does not mean they were not real. It means you spent them staying alive, which was the right place to spend them. He was quiet for a long time after that, and when he looked at her again, there was something in his face that was open in a way she had not seen before. Alberta, he said. Yes. Thank you. She nodded once and looked back at the fire and let the night be what it was. They reached Las Vegas and the sale went well, better than she had calculated. The beef prices were strong and the buyer was fair, and she came away with enough to pay off the entirety of Harrison Cole's debt with $230 remaining, which was more financial breathing room than she had started the year with. She paid Cole's debt on the way home, stopping at the Double C Ranch with a money order and her ledger book, meeting Cole at his door with the polished courtesy he used, and the specific pleasure of watching his polished courtesy bend around the fact of being paid. The debt is cleared, she said, handing him the receipt for the money order. In full, as you'll see. And I want to be direct with you, Mr. Cole. The Northeast pasture is not for sale. Not now, not when things get difficult, not under any circumstances I can anticipate. The Beckett Ranch is not going to be absorbed into the Double C. I would like us to be civil neighbors, and I am prepared to be a civil neighbor, but I need you to understand that what belongs to me is going to stay that way. Cole looked at her for a long moment. His politeness did not slip entirely, but something behind it shifted, from dismissal to something that was perhaps, grudgingly, the beginning of recalibration. You are a determined woman, Miss Beckett, he said. Yes, she said. I am. She rode home. The territorial commissioner's response arrived in November. It was formal, precise, and binding. The water rights interference was documented and condemned. A formal warning was issued to Harrison Cole. The county sheriff was directed to investigate the cattle losses with renewed attention, and Sheriff Herrera, with the territorial authority now formally engaged, found motivation to be considerably more proactive than he had previously managed to be. One of Cole's men, a younger hand named Dix, was found to have been the instrument of the missing cattle, working on instructions that Dix, faced with prosecution, was suddenly willing to specify in some detail. The cattle were not recovered. They had been sold on. But the matter was documented, and Cole found himself in the uncomfortable position of territorial scrutiny in a year when he was already dealing with a water rights dispute on the eastern edge of his land. He did not bother Alberta after that, not because he had changed his character, but because the cost-benefit arithmetic had changed. Harlan Webb, who had watched everything from the comfortable distance of long experience, came to Alberta's ranch one afternoon in late November with a bottle of good whiskey and the manner of a man paying respects that were genuinely owed. You did it right, he said on the porch with the whiskey. Clement would have been pleased. She thought about her uncle, his letter, the brevity of his faith in her. He said the land was better than it looked at first, she said. He was right, Harlan said. He usually was. Took him a while to say things, but when he said them, he was usually right. He left her the better part of the bottle, because Harlan Webb was practical about generosity, and she sat on the porch in the November cold and looked out at the land and felt the particular satisfaction of something being held through difficulty, something not given up, something kept. Winter came down from the mountains with conviction. The Beckett ranch prepared for it. Alberta had laid in enough hay and provisions, had the water situation well understood, had the cattle in the lower meadow where the grazing was protected from the worst of the wind, had the house stocked and the root cellar full and the firewood stacked chest-high against the side of the barn. Roscoe came out more regularly now, because the pretense of always having a specific reason had become unnecessary, and they had both stopped maintaining it. He came on Sundays, and sometimes Wednesdays, and sometimes in the middle of the week when something needed doing that went faster with two people, and he knew it. He had begun to know the ranch the way you know a place when you care about it, not just the layout of it but the character of it, which fence section always needed checking first after a wind, where the spring ran cold even in the worst dry spells, which of the horses needed a shorter bit and which needed a longer one. In December, there was a snowstorm that came down from the mountains fast and hard, and Roscoe was at the ranch when it started, and they both understood with the pragmatic calm of people who lived in a landscape that did not negotiate that he was not going to make it back to Dusthaven before it got dangerous. He slept on the couch with the extra quilt from Clement's chest, and Alberta put a stone in the fire to heat through, and wrapped it for the cold feet that the couch sleeping inevitably produced, and she went to her room and lay in the dark listening to the wind howl and the snow drive against the windows and felt, with a clarity that was both welcome and enormous, that she was not lonely in the way she had been lonely in Santa Fe, because he was there in the other room, and his presence, even at the distance of a wall and a closed door, was the warmest thing about the house. In the morning she made coffee and cornmeal mush, and he shoveled the porch and the path to the barn and checked the cattle and came back pink-faced from the cold, and they ate breakfast together at the kitchen table with the snow still falling outside, and she looked at him across the table in the bright white winter light and said, "I would like you to stay." He put his spoon down. He looked at her carefully. "For the snow," he said. "For longer than the snow," she said. He was very still. "Alberta," he said. "I know what I am saying," she said. "I have thought about it carefully, and I am not impulsive by nature, and when I say something I mean it. I am saying I would like you to be here. Not just on Sundays and Wednesdays, not just when there is a reason. I am saying I want you here." The morning light lay between them, white and clear. "I have not had anything I wanted to stay for in a long time," he said, low and careful. 12 years since the war ended, and I have been moving and working and not staying anywhere. And I put the livery here because somewhere had to be the place I stopped, but I did not feel settled until he stopped." "Until," she said. He looked at her. The directness she had come to know as the essential thing about him, the thing underneath all the quietness and carefulness, was fully present. "Until you rode in with that broken saddle strap," he said. She stood up from the table. He stood up from the table. They met in the middle of the kitchen in the white winter light, and he put his hands on her face with the same careful, honest attention he brought to everything he touched, and she put her hands against his chest and felt his heart beating under them, and he kissed her with the same quality of full attention, unhurried and certain, the way a man kisses when he has found the thing he was not planning to find but knows without any question that he has found it. Outside, the snow fell in the wide silence of the territory, and the mountain stood above it all, blue and permanent. Christmas came to Dusthaven the way Christmas came to frontier towns, with effort and warmth and a communal determination to make a celebration out of whatever was at hand. The church was decorated with pine boughs cut from the hillsides, and there was a gathering with music and food, and the particular warmth of people who lived difficult lives, choosing to be generous and joyful together in the midst of it. Alberta and Roscoe came together, and the town noted it with the pleasant thoroughness that small towns bring to such developments. Widow Hargrove smiled and said nothing, which was her version of enthusiastic approval. Harlan Webb shook Roscoe's hand and told him he had good taste, which was the highest compliment Harlan gave. Fernando, who was old enough to have formed a genuine fondness for Roscoe in the way that young men form fondness for men they respect, appeared beside Alberta at the punch bowl and said, with the charming directness of someone who had been watching things develop for months, "He is better when you are around. Less quiet." "He is still quite quiet," she said. Fernando thought about this. "Less quietly quiet," he said, which she found perfectly accurate. The new year of 1879 came in cold and clear, and with it came a question that she had been aware of him carrying for some time, because she knew him well enough now to read the specific quality of thoughts he was holding. He asked her to marry him in January, not with any theatrical apparatus, not with speeches, but in the middle of fixing the roof of the chicken coop together, both of them up on the wooden ladder with roofing nails and the hammer going back and forth between them in the flat, clear winter light. "Alberta," he said. "Yes," she said, not looking up from the shingle she was setting. "I want to marry you." She set the shingle. She looked at him. "Yes," she said. He looked at her. "That is the whole answer. You asked the whole question," she said. "Yes is the whole answer." He laughed, a full sound, warm and real, and she loved him with a fullness that surprised her with its completeness, as though it had not been built piece by piece but had been there waiting for him specifically, the exact size and shape of him. They were married in March of 1879 in the Dusthaven church that leaned slightly eastward, presided over by the minister, a quiet man from Ohio who had a gift for keeping ceremonies honest and warm. Alberta wore a dress she had made herself, blue wool with white at the collar and cuffs, and she wore her hair down, which she almost never did, and the handful of people in the church who knew her understood that this was a significant concession and treated it accordingly. Roscoe wore his best shirt and a jacket that had been borrowed from Harlan Webb and was slightly too broad across the shoulders, and he stood at the front of the church with his hat in his hands, and when she came down the aisle, his face had the unguarded look of a man who has put down all his careful management of what shows on it and is simply, completely present. He said the words of the ceremony quietly and clearly, and she said them the same way, and they meant every one of them. After the ceremony, there was a supper at the church hall with the food provided by the women of the town in an act of collective generosity that was also, Alberta understood, a welcome. She had come into this territory as an outsider, a woman alone on a working ranch, and she had held her land and paid her debts and faced down what needed facing down, and the town had seen it, and this supper was, in its way, the town telling her she had earned her place here. She sat at the head of the table with her husband beside her, and ate the food other people's hands had made with a gratitude that was entirely without pride. Roscoe's hand rested on the table next to hers, and she put hers over it, and he turned his palm up and held on. Spring came with the particular violence and beauty of spring in the high desert, sudden wildflowers on the mesa, and the creek running full, and the mountains losing their snow in long white streaks from the peaks down. The land greened up in a way that Alberta had not seen yet, having arrived the previous spring in the exhausted tail end of it, and the sight of the meadow going green and the cottonwoods leafing out in pale gold against the blue sky made her stand at the kitchen window on an April morning and feel something that she could only call joy, which was different from satisfaction and different from relief, both of which she had felt many times in the past year. This was the other thing. Roscoe came in from the barn and found her at the window. "Look at the cottonwoods," she said. He came and stood beside her and looked. He put his arm around her shoulders and she leaned into him slightly, just the small lean of two people who have learned the specific geography of being beside each other. "Clement knew what he was doing," he said. "He did," she said. Fernando had taken on more responsibility at the livery through the winter and into the spring, and Roscoe was able to shift his time more fully toward the ranch, which they had quietly begun to think of as theirs, both of them, though the deed bore only the Beckett name, and they had decided there was no urgent reason to change anything legal about it. The Beckett Ranch was its name and would remain so, Roscoe said simply, and that was fine with him. He brought his tools and his few books and his dark bay horse and his particular quietness and his full attention and his willingness to do any work that the land required. And these things joined with what was already there and made the ranch something new from the combination. They worked side by side through the spring, and this was one of the things Alberta came to love most precisely. Not the evenings with the lamplight, though she loved those too, not the mornings over coffee, though those were a daily particular pleasure, but the working side by side. The way he moved when there was a job to do. The way he talked through a problem on the fence line or with the cattle, thinking aloud in low, even sentences that were actually thinking rather than announcing. The way he listened to her ideas with genuine consideration, rather than the performed patience she had encountered in men who listened to a woman's ideas as a prelude to doing what they had already decided. They disagreed sometimes. About the cattle, about the best approach to the East Meadow that Harlan Webb thought could be brought into better use. They disagreed and argued, and she did not back down, and neither did he, and they found the better answer in the middle of the argument more often than not, and neither of them apologized for the argument once it was resolved, because neither of them thought there was anything to apologize for. In July she told him she was pregnant. She did it at the breakfast table, matter-of-factly, because she was still herself, because the news was large, and she needed the table and the coffee and the familiar room to hold it. He was very still for a moment. Then he came around the table and knelt beside her chair and held both her hands in his and looked at her with an expression that had the same quality as the one he had worn at the front of the church in March, the put-down management, the absolute presence. "Alberta," he said. She looked at him with eyes that were wet, which she had not entirely planned on but which turned out to be fine. "Are you frightened?" he asked. "Terrified," she said, "and pleased, both at the same time. Is that reasonable?" "That is the most reasonable thing I have ever heard," he said. He held her hands and she held his, and the morning came through the kitchen window warm and clear over the table and the coffee and the two of them. Through the summer pregnancy and the ranch work were conducted simultaneously, in the practical way that life on the frontier required. Alberta modified what she could, and continued what she must, and was honest with Roscoe about what she needed, which was sometimes help and sometimes space, and sometimes nothing except the knowledge that he was nearby. He was nearby. He was reliably, constantly nearby in the specific way of someone who has made the decision to be present and does not second-guess it. The birth happened in early March of 1880, 1 year almost to the day from the wedding, attended by the barber doctor, whose name was Samuel Prout, and who turned out to be considerably more competent in the medical half of his vocation than the barbering half. Roscoe sat outside the bedroom door through all of it with his hat on his knees, because Samuel Prout had firm views on the organization of a birthing room. When Samuel Prout opened the door and told him he had a son, Roscoe stood up and went into the room and stood beside the bed where Alberta lay exhausted and disheveled, and more beautiful than he had words for, with a very small, very new person in the crook of her arm. "He looks furious," Roscoe said, looking at the newborn's scrunched and urgent expression. "He came out with opinions," Alberta said. "I expect this is consistent. What do we call him?" She had been thinking about this. "Clement," she said, "if that is all right with you." Roscoe looked at her. The name, the rightness of it, the understanding it contained, the particular tribute to the man whose generosity had started everything. "Clement," he said. "Yes, that is exactly right." Clement Bancroft came into the world in March of 1880, with his mother's brown eyes and his father's watchful expression, and, as Alberta had predicted, opinions about most things. He was a solid, healthy baby, serious and alert from the first weeks, and he was the center of something in the ranch house that changed the quality of the light in a way that Alberta had not anticipated. She had expected to love him. She had not expected that love to have that particular texture, the way it made everything else both more and less important simultaneously. Roscoe proved to be the kind of father she might have suspected from his specific character, attentive and quiet, learning the baby the way he learned horses and land and bridle repair, with patient full attention, until he knew exactly what each sound meant and how to hold the particular weight of him in a way that was both secure and easy. She watched him one evening walking the length of the main room with Clement against his shoulder, the baby having reached the conclusion that being stationary was unacceptable, and Roscoe walking the room in even patient circuits talking to him in a low, continuous voice about the state of the fence on the north side, and what the spring was likely to look like, and the character of the mountains at different times of year, as though informing the 3-month-old of the facts about the land he had been born into. Alberta stood in the kitchen doorway and watched this, and was so full of love it sat in her chest like something physical. Dusthaven grew. This was not a dramatic growth, but the steady increment of a place that had found a viable position on the territory's roots, and was beginning to accumulate the weight of a real community. A school was proposed and then built, a small lumber building at the north edge of town, with a teacher who came from Missouri and had a methodical mind and a good disposition. A second mercantile opened on the main street, bringing the kind of commercial redundancy that meant people had a choice about things, which was one of the better indications of a place taking hold. The railroad was moving west through the territory in ways that were not yet at Dusthaven's door, but were getting less far away, and the conversations in the Iron Kettle saloon and on the church steps and over Widow Hargrove's kitchen table had the quality of people who were beginning to think about the long future of the place rather than just the current season. Alberta watched all of this with the eye of a woman who had decided this was her permanent country. She had not made that decision in any explicit moment. She had made it gradually, through the fence repairs and the cattle drives and the blocked channels and the kitchen table and the children and the mornings. The plural of children arrived in the fall of 1882. Another boy. They named him James, which was Roscoe's father's name, and James arrived with a temperament that was the precise opposite of Clement's, easy and cheerful and disposed toward amusement at whatever was offered, which turned out to be a particular gift in a household that already contained 2 serious people and 1 opinionated toddler. Clement, who was 2.5 when James arrived and had already developed firm ideas about most things, regarded the new baby with the careful suspicion of someone assessing a potential complication. And then one morning Alberta found Clement sitting beside James's basket talking to him in a low, serious voice that was, in its character and its cadence, so precisely his father's voice that she had to put her hand over her mouth. "What are you telling him?" she asked. Clement looked up. "About the fence," he said. She laughed until her eyes watered. Roscoe came in from outside and found her laughing and Clement looking at her with the patient expression of someone accustomed to being misunderstood, and the quality of the kitchen in that moment, the laughing and the baby in the basket, and the serious 2-year-old and the afternoon light in her husband's face, was the kind of moment she knew, even as it happened, that she would carry for the rest of her life. By 1883, the Beckett ranch was producing well. 2 good cattle drives had cleared the remaining financial pressure. Thomas Webb, now 24 and confident in his work, had been hired on permanently as a ranch hand, and the kitchen garden had been expanded significantly. The northeast pasture, which Harrison Cole had wanted so badly, was producing good summer grazing and had the best water on the property, and Alberta looked at it when she rode the fence line with a particular satisfaction. Cole himself had scaled back his interest in the surrounding properties. His own operation had encountered difficulties, a poor season and a water rights dispute on his eastern boundary that had consumed his attention and his legal resources, and he had less energy for the expansion projects that had characterized his earlier approach. He and Alberta maintained the civil neighbor relationship she had proposed at his door with the money order. It was not a warm relationship. It was a correct one, which was sufficient. Fernando, who was now 22 and had been running the livery largely on his own for 2 years, came to them in the spring of 1883 with the announcement that he intended to purchase the livery from Roscoe, who had been thinking about how to make this transition for some time and had already had conversations with Fernando about it. Roscoe and Alberta sat with Fernando at the kitchen table and worked out an arrangement that was fair to all parties, a gradual purchase over 4 years, payments in line with what the livery actually earned, with Fernando keeping full operational control from the beginning. Fernando shook Roscoe's hand with great seriousness, and then, because he was 22 and had learned from people who were generous without performance, embraced him briefly with the ease of genuine affection. This freed Roscoe more fully to the ranch, which was what the ranch needed and what he wanted, and what Alberta had not asked for because she would not ask for it, but had hoped for in the private way she kept certain hopes, warm and unexposed. The afternoon Fernando rode back to town, Roscoe stood on the porch looking out at the meadow and Alberta stood beside him. "Good," she said. "Very good," he said. "He has earned it and he will do well with it." "You knew this would happen when you hired him," she said. He glanced at her. "I hoped it might." "And the livery is his now," he said simply. "And this is ours." He looked out at the land. She looked at him. The years had settled on him like the land settled after a long rain into something both quieter and more sure of itself. He was not old. He was in his middle 30s and had the physical condition of a man who worked hard in open country. But the years showed in the specific way that a good life shows, in the lines beside his eyes and the ease of his hands, and the way he stood in the landscape as though he had always been part of it. She slipped her hand into his. "Roscoe," she said, "yes. I'm going to tell you something and I want you to hear it all the way through." He turned to look at her. She could feel his full attention. "When I rode into Dusthaven with the broken saddle strap," she said, "I was more frightened than I told anyone. I was not frightened of the ranch or the work or even Cole. I was frightened that I would be alone in it forever, that the choice I had made was the brave choice and the lonely choice, and that those two things were the same thing." She paused. "And then you said that word and I laughed because it was not the word I thought anyone would ever use for me. And you said you had never said it before. And I thought about that for weeks, why you had never said it, what it meant that you said it to me. And I think what it meant was that you were paying attention in the specific way that makes a difference, not just looking but seeing, and that was the thing I had not known I was waiting for." He was looking at her with that expression she had no adequate name for, the one that meant he was fully there, fully present, holding nothing back. "I was paying attention," he said quietly. "I know," she said. "That is what I am telling you." He brought her hand up and held it against his chest where his heart was, the same gesture she had made the morning after the snowstorm, the morning she told him she wanted him there, and the weight and warmth of it was the same and larger simultaneously. "Alberta," he said, "yes. I am going to tell you something and you should probably hear it all the way through." "I am listening," she said. "I came through a lot of years," he said slowly, believing that the particular shape of what I was looking for did not exist, not as a philosophical conclusion but as a practical one. I had looked not methodically but in the way you look when you are living your life and hoping that something aligns, and it didn't. And then I was not young anymore and I stopped looking, or I thought I had." He paused. "And then a woman came into my stable with a broken saddle strap and the most direct gaze I had seen in 15 years, and I found out that I had not stopped looking at all. I had just been waiting for the thing that was worth looking at." She was crying. She had not planned to cry. She was not by nature a crier, but she was a person who felt things all the way to the bottom of them when she allowed herself to. And she was allowing herself to now, on the porch of her uncle's ranch in the high summer afternoon, with the mountains above and the children inside and the land all around in every direction. He put his free hand against her face and she leaned into it. "We are a pair," she said, with the thickness in her voice that crying produces. "We are," he agreed. "A daughter came in the winter of 1885. They named her Ruth, because Alberta had loved the name since she was a girl, and because Ruth in the old story had chosen her place and her people and stayed through difficulty. which seemed like a good quality to name a person toward. Ruth arrived with her mother's brown eyes and her father's carefulness, and a disposition that would reveal itself, over the coming months and years, as both stubborn and tender in equal measure, which the people who knew her parents found entirely predictable. Clement, who was 5 when Ruth arrived, appointed himself her protector and guide with the grave seriousness of someone who has accepted a significant responsibility. And James, who was 3, was simply delighted by the addition of another person to the household audience for his general cheerfulness. Alberta sat in the rocking chair in the bedroom window the morning after Ruth's birth, nursing the baby in the early light, and looked out at the cottonwood trees in the yard, which were bare in the winter but whose branches caught the morning light in a way that was its own particular beauty. She could hear Roscoe downstairs, the sound of the stove being opened, the kettle being moved. She could hear Clement talking to someone in the low, serious voice, probably James, probably about something that James was listening to with cheerful incomprehension. The ranch was quiet outside, the cattle settled in the lower meadow, the spring running somewhere beyond hearing, the mountain standing above it all in the winter blue. Her life, Alberta thought, was the exact size and shape of the life she had ridden into the territory to find. Not the life she had imagined, because she had not had the specific imagination for this, for the kitchen table and the lamplight, and the man whose love was a form of full attention, for the children who were specific people from the first moment, for the land that had become her land in the way that land becomes yours when you have worked it and held it and loved it through difficulty. She had come with a broken saddle strap and a deed and $340 of inherited debt, and the stubborn belief that the choice she had made was the right one. She had been right. She heard Roscoe's step on the stairs, the particular tread she knew without looking, unhurried and certain, and the door opened, and he came in with 2 cups of coffee and looked at her in the window with the baby, and his face did the thing it always did and always would do when he looked at her, which was to lose every guard and simply be present. He set the cups on the side table and sat in the chair beside the window and looked at them both. "Good morning," he said. "Good morning," she said. They sat in the winter light and drank their coffee, and the morning was as good and full and real as any morning they had ever had, and better for being built on all the mornings before it. Outside, the cottonwood trees caught the rising light and threw their bare branch shadows across the porch in the yard, and the mountains stood above the mesa in their permanent blue, unchanged by any of it, and the Beckett ranch sat in the land it occupied with the solidity of something that was there to stay. Clement hollered from downstairs, something about James and something about breakfast, and James's voice floated up in response, cheerful and unconcerned. Roscoe looked toward the door and then back at Alberta. "Moment's over," he said, without any actual regret. "The moment is always changing," she said. "That is not the same as ending." He looked at her. The wood-smoke eyes, warm in the morning light. "No," he said, "it is not the same as ending." He stood up and kissed her forehead with the gentleness that had always been the truest thing about him under the quietness, and then he went downstairs to manage breakfast and the children and the morning, and she sat with the baby in the window with the light coming in and the coffee warm in her hand and everything exactly, precisely, completely in its right place. The years would bring their changes. The railroad would eventually come closer and change the shape of commerce in the territory. New Mexico would work toward statehood in the slow political way these things worked. The children would grow, Clement into a young man with his father's careful quality and his mother's stubbornness, James into someone full of good humor and practical competence, Ruth into a particular combination of both parents that surprised and delighted them by being something entirely her own. Thomas Webb would marry Harlan Webb's neighbor's daughter and build his own small place on the other side of the upper meadow. Fernando would make the livery a success, and then expand it and become the most prosperous man in Dusthaven, a fact he wore with characteristic ease. Harrison Cole would eventually sell the Double C in pieces to 3 different buyers, and the breaking up of it would be a thing that Harlan Webb noted with a satisfaction he expressed quietly and only once. The northeast pasture of the Beckett Ranch would remain exactly where it was. Roscoe and Alberta would grow old on the land together, not quickly, because they were not people who aged quickly, and not without difficulty, because the land and the life were never without difficulty. But together, in the specific way that two people grow old together when they have found in each other not the absence of complication, but the presence of the particular person who makes the complications manageable and the good parts luminous. On an evening in the fall of 1888, 10 years from the year Alberta had ridden into Dusthaven, they sat on the porch in the last of the light with the children all in bed and the land going quiet around them. The cottonwoods had gone gold, the way they did in autumn, shocking and beautiful against the dry country brown. The mountains had their first thin dusting of snow high up, white against the blue that was going dark now as the sun went west. Alberta had her feet up on the porch rail, which she never would have done in Santa Fe, which she did every evening now because the land was hers and the porch was hers and the evening was hers and she was allowed. Roscoe had his arm along the back of her chair, not quite around her shoulders but close enough that she could feel the warmth of it. 10 years, she said. Almost to the day, he said. She thought about the woman on the horse with the broken saddle strap, tired and scared and stubborn, riding into a town she had never seen. I was brave, she said, very quietly in the manner of something being acknowledged at last. He looked at her. Yes, he said simply. You were. She turned her head and looked at him in the last of the light, this man who had been the truest thing she had found in the territory. You told me, she said. I did, he said, on the church steps. Yes. She remembered the laugh, the surprise of the word, the way he had said he had never said it before with the quiet certainty that was simply the truth. Did you mean it? She said, knowing the answer. Every word, he said. Then and now. She took his hand and held it, their interlocked hands resting on the arm of the chair in the evening light, the cottonwoods gold and the mountains going dark and the ranch quiet around them in the way of a place that has been thoroughly settled and thoroughly loved and intends to stay. Roscoe, she said. Alberta, he said. And the evening held them, and the land held them, and everything they had made of the long material of their lives was present and accounted for, fully and completely and without remainder, as the last light left the sky and the stars came out over the mesa, one by one, the way they always did, indifferent and magnificent and entirely their own.